In today's video, I will once again go over pros and cons of characters, and in this part, I will talk about every single Electro character in Genshin Impact, and I will also be making this video for every character of each remaining element in the upcoming days, and you can check out the other 4 videos for GEO-HYDRO-DENDRO and ANEMO that I've already uploaded, so consider subscribing so you don't miss out on the next videos for all the remaining elements. And a special thanks to everyone who has been supporting me in the past few days. I appreciate it, and without wasting your time, let's start the video, starting off with the Electro Archon, Raiden Shogun. For her pros, she is a universal battery, meaning she can help make up for battering time lost due to her field time requirement or allow teammates to run lower energy recharge, and flexible with teammates that might otherwise see less use, such as kojou Sara, while still synergizing well with powerful units such as Bennett or Kazuha to deal a lot of damage. Also has a consistent, long-lasting off-field Electro application, makes her an excellent candidate for triggering Hyper Bloom, and can fit into many teams while having an important role in dealing the damage. And I know that fishing is not the most fun thing in Genshin or any game for that matter, but she can get a lot of value from a free-to-play that is obtained by fishing called catch, meaning you don't necessarily need a 5-star weapon for her to make a huge impact on your account, and you can use catch, and especially with refinements, this weapon can make a big difference. And for her cons, in some cases she can interfere with certain reactions because of her elemental skill, and while the off-field value of her is undeniable, but the damage is not that amazing compared to other off-field abilities from other characters. And other than these minor cons, I would say Raiden is one of the best characters in the entire game, and I would highly suggest pulling on her banner whenever she's available, and you won't regret it. Next one is kojou Sara. And as for her pros, her elemental burst has a decent AoE electro damage, and if you ever have her at C6, she can crit damage buff electro damage. And her artifact set, being Emblem of Severed Fate, is a resin efficient artifact set, and you can use that domain's artifacts for a few different characters even if you don't get the right ones for Sara. And now for cons, her full buffing potential is locked behind constellations, and being a 4-star makes it harder to get constellations even more, and her damage buff has a short duration which makes it less useful. She doesn't particularly fit into many teams unless you have a character like Raiden Shogun, as I mentioned, and they do synergize together, but she has an awkward and clunky playstyle which requires her charge attacks to be used in order to generate particles, and at C0 it's required to get the attack buff working. Overall, if you have Raiden, she's worth building, if you have more constellations of course, but even then there are better replacements for her to be used in different teams. So overall, I wouldn't suggest focusing on this character, and maybe focus on a different support character. Our next character, Miko. For pros, she has dynamic gameplay style that has some cool dashes and charge attacks, and especially the normal attack looks pretty cool and unique, and you can make use of some decent free-to-play weapons to deal good amount of damage as well, and doesn't need a lot of expensive investment to be useful. And she can provide off-field electro damage with 100% uptime, and her burst can deal a good amount of damage depending on your artifacts and the stats. And for her cons, potentially needs a lot of energy recharge because of poor particle regeneration from her elemental skill, and high cost of elemental burst makes her energy hungry, and sometimes needs some tricky rotation management to get the most use out of her, which can be challenging and not as fun, but she is very fun overall that can be used in quite a few teams and brings value whether off-field or on-field, but I would suggest looking at her as an off-field DPS for the most part. Next one is Razor. And for his pros, in my personal experience, if you get him in low ARs, he can carry your account for quite some time, since he can deal a good amount of physical and electro damage, and his elemental skill produces a decent portion of particles, and can easily proc superconduct when paired with a cryo unit during his elemental burst, and has really fast attacks during his burst, which also gives him some resistance to interruptions as well. And for cons, although the damage can be quite nice, the main focus of his kit is on physical damage rather than being on electro, and has limited team comps because you need a lot of on-field time with him, and his gameplay revolves around his burst, which has a fairly selfish and long duration, and you can't swap off of him during his burst because then you would be losing on the DPS potential, and you would need a good off-field support DPS to help him with the damage. But in my opinion, if you're below AR 45 or something like that, and you don't have a good DPS to carry your account, and you manage to pull a Razor from any banner, I would suggest building him and using him until that point, until you find a better DPS unit, but until then, he can do just fine for your account. Next one is Lisa, and for her pros, has high scaling multipliers and can deal a good amount of electro damage when she's on field, and can synergize well with Electro and Dendro units, and has multi-target damage potential in the right situations. And for cons, she has 80 energy cost elemental burst that requires high energy recharge stats on her, and her constellations are hard to obtain since they are never featured on event banners and you may never get more constellations for her, and requires fairly high investment to make her work well, and she is reliant on her hold elemental skill feature, which makes her not reliable as an off-field support character in most cases. And unless you like her a lot, I don't think she's worth the investment unless you need an Electro character for your Dendro based teams, and even then there are better options to bring more supporting and damage capabilities for your team, but if you have no other options, she can be pretty decent. Next character, Kuki Shinobu. And her pros, her healing scales from EM making her really good as an off-field support for Dendro Bloom teams, and the rare Electro healer that can fulfill 2 roles needed in a super conduct team as well, and can be consistent off-field Electro damage dealer, and her elemental burst doesn't have high cost and has a fairly good damage even as a support character. For cons, has low energy particle regeneration and needs to be at low HP to maximize her value, and vulnerable to damage when built for elemental mastery, and doesn't provide a party-wide healing, which can be a downside in some situations, but overall a fantastic option for Hyper Bloom or many different teams for that matter, and I would highly suggest building her for your account, and you would find her useful in most team comps. Next character, Beidou. For her pros, first off, her counter ability is really cool looking, and when done right, can feel super satisfying and rewarding, and synergizes well with other off-field units, and her elemental burst can stay even after switching to another character, which is always nice to have a non-selfish character. And for cons, she requires a lot of energy recharge to keep elemental burst up, and has fairly slow movement for a main DPS, and requires high investment to build her since she requires multiple stats, and achieving all of them through artifacts can be hard in general. Next one on the list, fischl. Starting off with her pros, she performs well as a sub DPS and main DPS if you use her as a physical DPS of course, and elemental skill will work even after switching off of her, and can be really valuable for Electro reactions, making her a good unit for Dendro Electro team comps. And for cons, single target DPS is where she shines the most, and that's not gonna be a good factor if you want her as a main DPS, because then she's gonna lack damage against a crowd of enemies, and elemental burst isn't as powerful to make up for it, and is only used to reset the elemental skill and bring Oz back for its value. And at last, she requires more constellations, making her a semi-constellation reliant unit, but overall I think she is a solid unit. Next one on the list, keqing. And as for her pros, she is a consistent unit for aggravate and electro charge reactions, and has a decent AoE potential. Her elemental skill is fun to use and teleport around in the open world, and can also hit weak points of the target, and her charge attacks is really fast with high multipliers on her damage. But for cons, charge attacks stamina consumption is higher than other sword users, and doesn't really work well with pyro units since overload knockbacks the enemies, and for a close range character like her, it could be annoying to chase them down, and her DPS mostly relies on her sub DPS characters in the party. And overall, if you're using her in an aggravate team with Dendro units, she's fantastic, but other than that, she can perform well in other roles for a lot of teams, and Dendro reaction based teams are where she shines the most. Our next unit, Cyno. And for his pros, he's a very easy unit to play and has a high base crit damage with decent AoE capabilities, and has an almost 100% uptime for using his burst. He can be good at Constellation 0, although Constellation 2 makes him a lot better, and for cons, can be difficult to build since you need to hit multiple stats like energy recharge, elemental mastery, and attack at the same time, and his attacks are not interruption resistant for the most part, which means he can get interrupted quite a lot, and he's similar to Razor, and during his burst you can switch to a different character, and has a selfish playstyle and doesn't work well with most team comps because you need teams with all off-field DPS or support abilities, and if you don't like playing Razor, you may not be enjoying playing this character. Even though they are using different weapons, I think their playstyle is quite similar. Next one is Dori, and for her pros, she has a good single target healing and is helpful to any main DPS that needs mid to high energy recharge, and can provide universal energy recharge support for your entire team. But for cons, low energy particle regeneration and high burst cost, and no multi-target healing, and elemental burst doesn't do a significant amount of damage, and overall has weak personal damage, making her not good even as a sub DPS, and mostly as support, but even as a support she can be subpar. But if you like this character, it's completely up to you. And at last, the Electro version of Traveler. And as always for Traveler, one of the main pros is that you can upgrade to C6 by just progressing through the story. It can be an excellent battery for any character and the support for Electro units, and very low investment required to build this character, and can decrease opponents' Electro resistance, which is really helpful, especially for Electro units in your party, and is free to play friendly since you have many options for weapons and artifacts, while this character can bring some value to the whole team. And for cons, as a DPS character has a really low damage output. While this character can generate a lot of energy, you might want to have some energy recharge stats to prevent any issues while using the character. Overall, not the best version of Traveler, and that title still belongs to the Dendro Traveler, but can be really useful in some situations if you don't have any other characters to help you generate energy, and if you're running energy hungry team comps that can benefit from using the Electro Traveler. And with that, we briefly covered pros and cons of every single Electro character. Don't forget to watch other parts that I've already made, and for the future videos for each element and more Genshin Impact content, consider liking and subscribing. And if you have any suggestions or anything you want me to make a video about, let me know down below in the comments, and I would highly appreciate it. With all that being said, have a good day or night, and peace.